It's really, it's a tremendous honor to be here, to be at the school. I've had the opportunity not to be at the school before, but to be at the library and to, since I'm an Okie, I've been to Little Rock a lot of times. It is really great, David, to see you. David's one of the truly great people in this country, and I love him. And I'm sorry. Now, two of my friends here cannot be here tonight. They have very poor excuses. Dustin McDaniel, good friend of mine, is going to a parent-teacher conference. I cannot imagine that he skipped this for that. And Robert Thompson, State Senator Robert Thompson, who had virtually no excuse at all. They're having a baby today. And so, that's the way life is. Well, I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to be here. And first, I want to make a little bit of a confession to you, and that is the book. The title of my book is a little misleading. No, it's a lot misleading. The title of the book is "Reclaiming Conservatism: How a Great Political Movement Got Lost and How It Can Find Its Way Back," or something like that, similar. When I was writing the book, it's published by Oxford University Press. They're very bright people. They're good editors. They're very smart. And I said, I don't like the title. It is about reclaiming conservatism. It is about that political philosophy. But I also said it's about the Constitution. It's about the American Constitution. And they said, but Mickey, we can't put the word Constitution in the title of a book because nobody will buy it, because nobody cares about the Constitution anymore. And as time has gone on over the last year, I've decided that unfortunately they were probably right. And that's part of the story that I want to tell and what I'm concerned about. And by the way, just to show, I'm a nice guy and I don't hold hard feelings. Oklahoma tonight, at almost this very moment, is playing in the tournament and thankfully survived, getting beaten by the Razorbacks, which I did not appreciate at all. But anyway, thank you for letting me be here. When I talk about American conservatism, American conservatism was a political philosophy, a construct, a set of precepts that was based on one fundamental idea. And that idea has to do with a phrase that drives a lot of people crazy, American exceptionalism. But here's what American exceptionalism meant. A lot of people cringe. They say, well, you talk about American exceptionalism, it means what, you think Americans are wiser, we're smarter, we're better than other people? Well, that's not what it means, and that's not what it's about. We're not any better or wiser or smarter than anybody else in the world. In fact, we came from, all of us, from other parts of the world. What's about America that's exceptional is the Constitution. It's the form of government that we have. Because before America, there was one very common form of government throughout the whole world, everywhere. It was very simple. Any political science class could do it. Like it was. There were rulers and there were subjects. Rulers and that's all there was. And the people who founded this country said, "We're not going to be anybody's subjects. We're going to be citizens." And the difference is, rulers tell their subjects what to do. Citizens tell their government what to do. And our founders totally changed the system upside down. And that's what American conservatives believed in. It came from a lot of different streams, but starting at least in the early 60s, American conservatives were that movement that took its ideals straight from John Locke and James Madison with an emphasis on the rights of individual people. Living in a collective society, living together in a real nation, but where the rights of the individuals were paramount, not the rights of the government. And that's what conservatives believe. That's what our fundamental political philosophy was at that time. And that's not at all what it has come to be. And so I want to use a few examples of that, of how it has changed over time. I actually wrote a few notes. I never write notes, but I wrote a few tonight just out of, I knew David would be here and I've talked with him, and so here's the problem. I don't have a lot of vanity and I have very little to be vain about, but without my glasses, which I'm not going to put on, I can't read my notes. So, you know, it doesn't matter. In the year, as Skip said, my background has been in American conservative politics. I was chairman of the American Conservative Union. I was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. I'll get back to that in a minute. And when Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980, I was the director of all of the policy task forces for the Reagan campaign. I was very close to Ronald Reagan. So I grew up in the conservative movement. I worked in the year 2000 for President Bush's campaign. I was a foreign policy advisor to the Bush campaign in 2000. At some point during President Bush's first term, he began to issue signing statements. Let me say a word about signing statements. George Washington issued signing statements. They're very common. A president signs a bill, and when he gets the bill, he signs it and he says either one of two things. He's got two options. The option one, this is really good bill. I had nothing to do with writing it. It came out of Congress, but I'm the president. I'll get all the credit for it, so hey, I'm going to sign it. The other is, I don't like this very much. It's the best we could do, and I'm going to sign it anyway, reluctantly. In either case, when the president signs that bill, it becomes law. He doesn't have to sign it if he doesn't like it. He shouldn't sign it if he thinks it's unconstitutional. In fact, the president has enormous power. Veto power is enormous. I don't know if you've thought about this. If the president vetoes a bill and the Congress says we're going to pass it anyway, and the House votes 435 to nothing to pass it over the president's veto, and the Senate votes 66 to 34 to pass it over the president's veto, the president still wins. He only needs 1/3 of one House. It's a very powerful tool. But if he signs it, it's law. It's law. And it's binding on every one of you, and it's binding on me, and it's binding on him. And no president in the history of the United States had ever before said that I will sign this bill, it will become law, and I will decide whether or not I have to follow it. And this president, and this, by the way, there's a lot of this about this conservative Republican president that I will tie to today, because it's not just about him. But he issued 1,100 such signing statements, which nobody knew about until a friend of mine named Charlie Savage of the Boston Globe discovered that he had done that. These statements declaring that he was not bound by the laws that he had signed. Well, the American Bar Association appointed a task force drawn from conservatives and liberals. The American Bar Association and the Constitution Project appointed a task force. I was on both of them. We had Ronald Reagan's former FBI director, Ronald Reagan's former deputy attorney general, and myself, and people from all across the political spectrum. And our task force, both task forces, very broad, unanimously concluded that what the president had done was unconstitutional. And the American Bar Association House of Delegates overwhelmingly voted that what he had done was unconstitutional. And then I was invited, along with the president of the Bar Association, American Bar Association, to testify before Congress about this. Well, I thought, this is a slam dunk. Sometimes you go back before your old colleagues and you testify, and they're just waiting to give you hell and get even with everything you've done that they disagreed with. But this was going to be a slam dunk, because who in the Congress of the United States was going to agree that the president had a right to disobey the laws they had written and passed and he had signed? And I testified, and when it was over and we got to the question and answer period, not one Republican on that committee, they all called themselves conservatives, good friends of mine, not one thought there was anything wrong with a president of the United States saying, I'll decide for myself whether I have to obey the law. And that became part of a pattern. I had observed this earlier during the first term, when the man who was in charge of the Social Security office that was putting together the Medicare drug prescription bill for seniors lied to Congress, deliberately lied. He told staff members who worked for him that if you tell the Congress the truth about the cost of this bill, you'll be fired. And that bothered me a lot. But then came the signing statements. Then came the U.S. attorney thing. Let me say something about the U.S. attorney. The president, the administration decided that it would be a good idea if a number of sitting U.S. attorneys resigned their positions. That is perfectly legitimate. They work for the president. If he wants them to resign, they resign. Nothing wrong with that. The House decided to have hearings to see whether or not any laws were broken or whether new laws needed to be passed. That's their job. No problem. And so the House Judiciary Committee issued an invitation to Harriet Miers, who was the president's chief legal counsel, and to Josh Bolten, his chief of staff. They wanted Bolten to bring papers. They wanted Harriet Miers to come testify. They said no. That's not a big deal, right? It's like a party invitation. You don't have to go. Then they issued a subpoena. A congressional subpoena is not like a party invitation. You're supposed to go. They said no. And here's why. Excuse me. They said no because they claimed executive privilege. Executive privilege is a doctrine that says the president is to be protected in his ability to get candid advice. And you cannot question people who have given advice to the president about what they told him. It's a perfectly legal doctrine, fair, proper, appropriate. The only problem was the White House said that the president wasn't involved in any of these conversations. So for the first time in the history of the United States, a president made the claim that the Congress could not question any member of the White House staff about a conversation they had with other members of the White House staff about another subject. There was one more. We could get into, when you get to Q&A, there are, excuse me, a couple of others you might want to get into. Thank you. What am I having here? Let me say something here. This is great. I love it. But the only reason I come back from a place like D.C. or Massachusetts is to get a Dr. Pepper. You can't get up there. Thank you. The attacks on 9/11 changed a lot of the way that we began to look at our national security issues. And this will come as a shock to a lot of people, especially presidential scholars. But the Congress really doesn't want us blown up either. And so the Congress, even before 9/11, passed legislation that said to the executive branch, that we authorize the executive branch to conduct electronic surveillance on American citizens in order to ensure our national security. The only thing you need to do is to get a court warrant, to go before a judge to make the point that there is a security interest in conducting this surveillance. That's what we do with the mafia and everybody else. And we'll create a special court. And we'll not only create a special court, but in case you need to do this fast before they can get away, we'll let you do it and then get permission retroactively after the fact. I mean, what more could you want? And the president said, I don't need a warrant. I'm the president. Sounds like Richard Nixon saying, if the president says it, it's not illegal. Well, through all of this, you could say that this is an aberration. This is a person who's carried away with listening to people like John Yoo and others, and believing he has more power than he has. But in fact, it was the Republicans, the so-called conservatives in Congress, who were empowering, who were authorizing, who were permitting the president to do these things. And I thought to myself, if Lyndon Johnson had done these things, conservatives would have marched on Washington in protest, because it is so against what we conservatives believe. I started talking about American exceptionalism and what's different about our system. There was an article in the Washington Post by a columnist named Dana Milbank. And he had this little item. I don't know if I can say this in such close proximity to the Clinton Library and in a school named for a former president of the United States. But Dana Milbank wrote this column about George Bush, and he said, the president is getting ready to go overseas for meetings. He's going to, for the next week and a half, step out of his role as the head of government to function in his other role as head of state. And so I teach at Princeton now, and I met with my students. I said, help me analyze this. What thought pops into your mind when you hear that the president for a week is going to step out of his role as head of government to act in his other role as head of state? What? Basing rights, treaty, The president's not the head of government. This ain't Peru. We don't have a head of government. We have three completely equal branches of government: separate, independent, and equal. And the one the president heads is not the one that decides on war or spending or taxes. That's people like David Pryor, not whoever's president of the United States. And so to get it back into the concept of what it was we conservatives believed in, it was the idea of a government that lived within this idea of separated and divided powers, not just between the branches, but between the federal government and the states, and that has been lost. So let me make a couple of other points about the changes that I've seen. I was a founder of the Heritage Foundation. And I recently gave a speech about my book at the Heritage Foundation. And when I was introduced by somebody who used to work for me on my staff when I was at the American Conservative Union. And we had a large crowd. And a lot of the people in the crowd were not familiar with the Heritage Foundation. And so she said, let me tell you about, before I introduce our speaker, let me tell you about the Heritage Foundation. Let me tell you who we are, what we believe. And she started reading from the mission statement. And the mission statement: strong defense, less government, lower spending, preserving traditional values. And I got up and I said, wait a minute. I helped to write the mission statement. There's nothing in there about preserving traditional values. We wrote the mission statement in 1973. The part about traditional values was added in 1993. Because what conservatives believed was that we are what matters, the individuals, and it's our lives and it's our choices to make. And it's not the role of the government to step in and tell us how to shape our own lives. And yet, we now have the Heritage Foundation doing this. We have, Barry Goldwater started this modern conservative movement. Barry Goldwater started this movement about how what matters is freedom. That's why we're Americans. It's what we believe in. It's liberty. It's freedom. And what did he say about gay rights? I don't care if they're gay or straight as long as they can shoot straight. We have this love affair, conservatives today, with small government. Small government. That has nothing to do with conservatism. The idea of conservatism is limited government. We have a country of nearly 300 million people. If all you had was the Defense Department, the highways, the post office, the things the Constitution spells out, it would not be small. The idea is to have government that has limits beyond what it can do. So you had conservatives wanting to keep government out of areas it properly should be in and get government into areas it had no business in. Let me give you an example of the latter one. And say what happened to the people who believed in limited government. In the state of Oregon, the voters had a referendum. And the voters said in that referendum, if somebody is dying, if they are terminally ill, with more than one doctor having certified that they have no chance for recovery, they are dying. And that person, in the being witnessed by others, says, I want my doctor to be able not to administer anything that would cause death, which goes against the Hippocratic Oath. But I want my doctor to be able to prescribe for me a medication that would enable me at some point to take it to hasten my own death rather than die slowly in agony. The conservatives in Congress intervened to try to stop that. And so we had gone from being the party of limited government to the party that said, we're not only going to control your lives while you live, but we're going to tell you how you can die, when you can die, and in how much pain and agony you can die. And that was the opposite of everything American conservatives had ever believed in. During the last campaign, every Republican candidate for president, and I'm about through here and then we'll take questions. Every single Republican candidate for president, I'm sure they came through here, they came through everywhere, they all wanted to be the next Ronald Reagan. They'd go around competing with each other. It didn't make any difference who it was. It could be Huckabee, it could be Romney, it could be, McCain, it could be anything. I'm the next Ronald Reagan. No, I'm the next Ronald Reagan. None of them had the foggiest idea what Ronald Reagan believed. For example, they would talk about Reagan and they would always quote Ronald Reagan. I love this. His most famous quote, other than Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. His most famous quote was, government is not the solution, government is the problem. I knew Ronald Reagan really well. He didn't believe that nonsense. What did he say? I am not promoting my book, which is over here. But on page 176, it has the quote, because I remembered it. What he said was, I know there are Democrats in there, you'll have to forgive me, David. He said, in the present circumstance, that being Jimmy Carter, in the present circumstance, government is not the solution, government is the problem. And then he went on, and so there is no mistake. Let me be clear that we are not anti-government. We are for government that stands with the people, that promotes prosperity. It's in the book. That was his speech. Every single Republican candidate for president who quoted Reagan quoted him not only wrong, but in reverse of the point he was making. So that's where I start to think about what happened to my party, what happened to the movement that I believed in. How did we get to this point? Very quickly. We started forgetting all of our basic fundamental values and what we believed in. You look at the neocons who, by the way, I'm a neocon to the sense of wanting to promote democracy and freedom. I believe in that strongly, but not by military force. What did conservatives believe in? You go back, one of the things I did in my book that's really unfair, and I apologize to any of you who might be offended by it, is I went back and looked at every Republican convention platform from 1964 to 2004 and traced how they changed and how they reversed themselves. We never talked about the desirability of war to achieve the kind of society we believed in. We talked about peace through strength. Peace. We wanted a strong, my wife's a liberal, we spent so much money on national defense, it just drove her crazy. She hated it. But we spent the money on the military not to go to war, but to avoid war, to keep the peace. That's what conservatives believed in. And we forgot that, and we started pandering, and we started, in order to try to gain power, I've got a little bit in there about Newt Gingrich, whose idea about good government was how to gain power, but no matter what it took. In order to achieve that, we started becoming the anti-intellectual party. The party of ideas, of brain power, of Locke and Madison, became the party that said, there are problems in Pakistan, there are problems in India, there's problems with the economy. How to fix them? Let's send a plumber. That was us. The party that had created the Heritage Foundation in Cato became the party that fixed the problems with Joe the plumber. And it became embarrassing to be a Republican. It became embarrassing to be a conservative. So what I talk about is, I'll stop here, but it's the end of the book, is some of the things we need to recapture about our fundamental basic principles, about what we believed in, why the people turned to us, and what we have to do to go back to those things so they can re-embrace us again. Because I have to tell you in all honesty, when people say to me, what do Republicans and conservatives need to do in order to win? The first thing we have to do is make ourselves deserving of winning. Not grassroots politics, not money raising. Make ourselves worthy of winning, and then we can win. So let me stop there and, take questions. Thank you. Yes. Let me just say, Skip, the only thing better than this, any of you ever go to Washington or to Boston? Do you ever try to get a chicken fried steak? God, it's hard. Well, the sacrifices one makes. Okay.
Well, they say that, I read an article, by the way, I'm a huge Dr. Pepper fan, so we keep them around here. But I read an article that Republicans drink more Dr. Peppers than Democrats. But I just want you to know that I'm right there with you on that issue. All right, let's throw it open to questions here. Mary Jane.
At what point through all your study of history do you think that the Republican Party, in my opinion, lost its way by focusing on minutia, continuing to hammer the abortion issue, the stem cell issue, the gay issue, when there's so much more out there to talk about, fiscal conservatism, et cetera?
Right. Well, I think there were a couple of different things that happened. One, going back to Jimmy Carter again, there was a period in which people in the religious community felt that they were under attack, whether it was for taxing schools or what church schools. So they felt under attack, whether fair or not. And so they began to organize politically. After the defeat of, going back to history here, after the defeat of George Wallace and the disappearance of the American Independent Party, a lot of people who were conservative, not just fiscally, but in their lifestyle, regular churchgoers and all, started coming to the Republican Party, and were, I think, probably rightly outraged about some of the incursions by the highly secular parts of the community. And they started defending themselves, and they were coming to the Republican Party. But they didn't draw the distinction between preaching for change and using government to bring it about. That was part of the problem. The second part was Gingrich. When Newt rose to power as first the whip in the Republican Party, he introduced a couple of new ideas. When I ran for office, my job was to elect me. That when I won my seat, that was one more Republican, one less Democrat, therefore a better country, right? And that was all I had to do. But Newt introduced this idea that we were also supposed to raise money and put it into a common pool in order to defeat Democrats. It didn't matter who they are. It could be somebody like David, could be a very conservative Democrat. It didn't matter. We had to defeat Democrats. And so you raised money, and that's how the whole K Street thing came about, leaning on lobbyists to give you money so that you raised a big pool of money to defeat Democrats. The other thing that happened was that we would take bills to the House floor that we didn't think could win. We didn't even know if they were good. It was to embarrass a Democrat. So say you had a Democrat from Arkansas, and maybe you could bring a bill to the floor that would cause that person either to get in trouble with their leadership or in trouble with their constituents. Just some way to knock off another Democrat. And that began to drive the whole thing. The Contract with America was put together by Frank Luntz, and it was not creative ideas. It was taking polls saying, what do the people want? Let's give it to them. And that was it. Well, here's the danger. And how do I tie this back to what happened with George Bush? And what happened with the Republicans supporting even the most outrageous unconstitutional things he did? It was this. When you see yourself as a member of a legislative branch, as a check on the executive branch, you're a separate branch, an independent branch, and an equal branch, then your job is to look anew at every proposal, decide for yourself, what do we support, what do we think is right. But when you begin to see the president not as the head of a different branch of government, but as the head of your party, because party now trumps ideology and ideas, when the president's the head of your party, your job is like protecting your quarterback from getting sacked. No matter what he says, you've got to protect your quarterback. And that's kind of how we gradually, over a period of time, got to this point. But it's been evolving over a period of years.
Question right here. Yes. Okay, wait for the mic.
Okay, so I've never been embarrassed to be a Republican. I think that's more in D.C. and Princeton where you're embarrassed to be a Republican. But
I'm an Okie.
One thing are you claiming that Clinton never wrongfully used executive privilege? And that's one. And two, are there no constitutional ways to combat that?
Clinton did some of it. Reagan did some of it. Nobody's ever done it like this. Nobody had ever said, I as the president will decide whether I have to obey the law. Nobody had ever issued 1,100 signing statements. In fact, it was more than every president in the history of the United States combined. Nobody had ever done that. Are there constitutional ways? If you read the book, I'm not trying to get you to get it, but if you read it, my argument is, if the president of the United States was guilty of malfeasance, the Congress was guilty of nonfeasance. It didn't do its job. The proper thing for the Congress to say was, when Republicans controlled it, we love you, Mr. President, but we don't work for you. And when the president stepped over the line to say, we're not going to support that, that's not constitutional. You know, I believe the reason we started this thing with David's a liberal, I'm a conservative, I am a conservative. You know, on almost every issue of taxes, spending, anything, I am a conservative, not a liberal. But I believe in operating within the Constitution. And where that fell down was the failure of the Congress to assert its authority and say, Mr. President, you can't go there. So that's the answer to it. Yeah. Yeah. Both. It's both the President and the Congress. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I said that in the book. That's human nature. Look, if you, whatever job you've got, if you're a doctor and you, a what? Okay. Well, I mean, I've spoken at many bar associations. I spoke to the ABA twice, and I'd say the president's not the head of government. They go, oh, that's right. You know, so part of it is getting back people to go back and look at the Constitution. Every single word in the Constitution is there for a purpose. There it is. You know, I always have it with me. The thing that we need to do is to have a Congress. I advocated this. When you're, I don't even know who the congressman is from this district or where you're from, so I'm not saying that. When a member of Congress comes back to face the constituents, they need to be confronted with their understanding of what their job is. And it's not to support the president of whichever party, but to do their job of independently making evaluations and living within the Constitution. I don't disagree with you at all. Yeah.
There's one right here, Alex.
First off, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you having you here. In recent weeks, there's been a lot of distinction drawn between the Republican Party and the conservative movement, primarily with the whole Rush Limbaugh, Michael Steele kind of back and forth. And I was wondering if you could comment on what you see as the reality snapshot of the party right now. Is there the Republican Party and the conservative movement as two very distinct veins that are growing and developing, and where do you think that's headed?
Well, one of the things that we used to say as conservatives that I wish we would say again, and it would solve many of these problems, is I was a member of the Republican Party, still am, still a Republican, but I'm a conservative, and the party was a vehicle to use to get our ideas, you know, not to just have our club beat your club. And Mike Steele, who I really, really like, Mike has taken on Rush Limbaugh to argue, I think, for the soul of what a conservative is. I wrote a column in the LA Times in which I attacked Rush and Coulter. So my old friend Laura Ingraham invited me on her program. Laura was upset. I mean, she and I have been friends quite a while. She was upset that I hadn't named her. I said, well, you know, Laura, I think you're important. You know, and so she had me on the show, but during the show, you should listen to it. I was saying, it's not that all of Rush's ideas are wrong, but it's the hatefulness, it's the exaggeration, it's the divisiveness. And she said to me, which later, by the way, is what Mike Steele said about Rush, she said, but Mickey, you have to understand, it's entertainment. It's for the ratings. The problem is a lot of the people who listen don't understand. It's for entertainment and for the ratings. David and I taught together at Harvard at the Kennedy School. One of my students was Bill O'Reilly. Now, my wife has been on his show a few times and just despises him. But what I said, I like Bill. And I said, here's how that happens. Bill would come to me, to my office in the Kennedy School, and he would say, he was then a reporter, television reporter in Boston. His career wasn't going anywhere. And he said, you know, he was never outspoken in class, he was just a normal student, and he would say, Mickey, you know, my career's not going anywhere, I've got to come up with a gimmick. I've got to come up with kind of a niche, you know, so that I can be, you know, make it in showbiz. And he did. And so did Rush. The poor man's champion making $800 zillion a year by trashing people and trashing the system. And so I think Mike Steele is at the moment the hope of the party. Mike has a problem. He has a real difficult problem. In the Democratic Party, you have a convention every 4 years. And in between conventions, the Democratic National Committee runs the party and makes decisions, can change policy positions, can change the rules. The Republican Party doesn't have that. We have a national committee, but the rules are set only at the conventions and cannot be changed for another 4 years, which means Mike, as the party chairman, can only go so far because he is bound by what the platform says. He's bound by the decisions the convention made because he doesn't have the power to change them. So he's articulating and he's playing the little game. Rush, you're outrageous. What you're doing is terrible. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I shouldn't have said that. Rush, and he's trying to balance the thing. The problem is he's trying to be a spokesman to move the party away from Limbaugh, but at the same time, he has to raise money. He has to build an organization. He can't just be a front man. Howard Dean was able to be the front man because their national committee situation is different. And, it is a battle not about ideology. Mike Steele's a conservative, and so is Rush. It's not a battle over ideology. It's about style. It's about temperament. It's about ideas. It's about thoughtfulness. It's about being a governing party in a free democracy of 300 million people. And the Limbaugh style ain't the way to do it. So.
Questions? Any further questions? I've got one before we close. As the Republicans look to 2012, Bobby Jindal, Mike Huckabee, others, who do you see out there that is going to emerge?
That's impossible to answer because, several of those people, Bobby didn't help himself with his talk on national television, but you recover from those. If you remember, Bill Clinton didn't help himself with his speech at the National Convention, and then he went on to serve 8 years.
Well.
I don't know who's going to emerge. Mitt Romney is already actively in campaigning. Governor Warner of South Carolina is doing it. I think it's way too early to tell. And it may be somebody we don't know yet. Tim Pawlenty isn't really doing much, but he has the ability. He's been a good governor in Minnesota. There are a lot of people out there who it's way too early to know who's good.
That's Sarah Palin.
I want you to know that question came from my wife. Oh, that came from David. Oh, I see. Well, I just saw a national poll last week that her favorable ratings are higher than her unfavorable, considerably. I think Sarah, who I don't know, was very badly used by an inept, incompetent McCain campaign. And she was pushed into a box where she was not allowed to be herself. And they said, okay, this is our campaign. This is what we're doing. It was a very populist, anti-ideas kind of thing. And I think she was hurt by that. And so she's got time to, she's avoided a lot of controversial kinds of opportunities. And I think she's going to try to, but, I run this program for young political leaders. The one who, can I say this very quickly? We put together a program where every year we go out and identify the 24 top young political leaders in America, 12 Republican and 12 Democrat, for a fellowship, which is what Dustin's in and what Robert Thompson is in. And we do that. And one of the people we had been looking at was Sarah Palin. And one of the things we found is I would call, because I check everybody out very thoroughly, and I would call reporters in Alaska. I would call political leaders, including Democrats in Alaska. This is before all this stuff happened. Sarah Palin was very popular. Popular with the press, popular with the academics, popular, with the Democrats in the legislature in Alaska. And nothing happened to change that until she started following the McCain campaign playbook. And so I don't want to write her off. Because I don't know that I really know yet who Sarah Palin really is. So.
Let's give a round of applause to Congressman Mickey Edwards.